specialist for DUI law, and at Rosenstein Law Group. How many lawyers do you guys have?
We have 12 attorneys and 25 sports attorneys.
Awesome. And how long have you been in business?
Opened in 2006.
Woohoo! We love long-standing Arizona businesses. We're here to support it, as well as our brand new ones. It's fun to know established businesses. And I feel like the more established businesses you know in this community, the better off you are for the health of your business. And it really is always great to know people who've been doing it the right way for a long time. So without further ado, Craig, boom. All right, you probably have to click the little side arrow for that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Morning, everybody. Didn't know it was being recorded. I wouldn't have had as much beer. It kind of floated. Saw the machine last night. It's awesome. I recommend dialing it. Donna has been a great help and resource for our practice. I love being like a swag king. So I'm going to be passing out swag. We have these incredible bottle openers. You can imagine why we do it. We do DUI defense. We had them send over a whole bunch of them years and years and years ago, and we just picked the best one because I think like chick swag is like, here, go this way. So we like getting the good stuff. So I'm going to pass around these. Also, we have koozies that we can pass around. A drunk dial you won't regret. It'll be fun. You know, you can imagine why we do that. And then as we get into kind of what DUI is and how it works, how it's prosecuted. We also have these registration and insurance holders. So you can kind of remember, God forbid you find yourself in a situation, we'll pass all this stuff around. So, as far as introductions go, I am not above modest self-aggrandizement. We have 3 locations. So we have our main Scottsdale location, which is where almost everybody's housed. We just actually opened up a Phoenix location. We haven't moved in yet. We also have Gilbert and Tempe locations. I'll be perfectly frank, most of them are just for SEO purposes. We do have offices there, but we don't use them very much. But we do have, presence throughout the entire valley. I have 12 attorneys that work for me. We have 3 major divisions. So our current divisions are the criminal practice, which is what I grew up doing. That's what I've been doing now for almost 20 years. We have 8 attorneys that work in that division. We have one of the largest military and veterans benefit practices in the entire Southwest right now. We just opened that 2 years ago and it has absolutely exploded. I hired an accounting attorney who was a Marine and he had difficulty navigating the bureaucracy that was the VA and the federal government. And we started that and it's actually just been gangbusters. And then we also have a personal injury practice. I have a personal injury attorney that works with me. We kind of grew up on the same circuit together. He's been doing it for 20 years. He's excellent. And we have 5 support staff just for him alone. But it's more, we do our own litigation. So we're a very litigation heavy practice. As far as the history goes, I am one of 4 board certified DUI defense specialists in the state. 2 of them work in my office. So one of my right-hand men, John Vogel, is one of the others. We also have board certified criminal specialists. So we started expanding about 5-6 years ago. When cars started driving themselves, we kind of realized that we might want to expand a little bit and get out of just doing DUIs. I have taken over 150 jury trials to verdict, which is a lot. And as a result, realized kind of that we had to spread out. So we started hiring the best of the best, and our team right now is just fantastic. We are the only practice in Maricopa County with both DUI and criminal specialists. Anyone?
We'll go to the next page.
Yeah, here.
I will read for you.
With our lovely assistant, John.
Sorry, I can make computers explode just by looking at them. So.
More fluff.
Yes, more fluff. Okay, AUCJ is the criminal defense bar in the state of Arizona. In May, so last month, I was actually awarded the Lifetime Achievement in DUI, which actually was both incredibly humbling, but it also caused a existential crisis of sorts that I've been doing this long enough that I got a Lifetime Achievement Award. So it kind of spun me out a little bit. I am a past president of that organization. I'm a registered lobbyist. One of my passion projects is I do criminal justice reform advocacy at the state legislature. We primarily work with the majority party, and as a result, we are one of the few organizations that do this that have actually gotten built sensible, realistic bills passed and signed by the governor. The previous governor, this governor has not signed anything for us yet. I'm a founding member of DUI DLA, which is a national organization. I've spoken at a number of different national and state organizations on trial advocacy with DUI defense, and so that's kind of my jam. That's what I do personally, but I kind of oversee this kind of now ever-growing monster. Okay, so by the way, we're going to be going into a bunch of different things. I'm going to educate a little bit on how DUIs. First things first, though, let me just be unequivocally clear. For some reason, people assume that I am pro DUI because of what I do. Let me be absolutely clear on this. I do not recommend driving while impaired. I've seen some pretty horrific things. I've seen very good people go to jail for a very long time, and I try to avoid people. I discourage people more than anything. I genuinely do this. I hand out my business card. I'm one of the few people in the world who hands out their business card in hopes that no one ever has to use it. That being said, there is a mechanism on how this is, like how these are charged and prosecuted. Arizona is by far, whether you agree with it or not, it is by far the most punishment heavy of the entire of every state in the union. There is no close second place. So Arizona is the only state in the union that has mandatory jail time on first offenses. And so, I mean, listen, you can agree with it. I mean, from a public policy standpoint, I'm not going to even stand here and say that it's a bad idea. What I'm going to say is there's a mechanism in place that does this, and there are some. I have legitimate concerns, but we can walk through how it works. But I do not want anybody at any point in time while we're going through this to ever think that I am pro DUI. So I just want to make sure that we talk about that. Okay, so the goals for today, and by the way, at any point in time, just raise a hand. I'd rather have a dialogue than just kind of stand up here presenting. So just chat, like that would be way more fun, I think, for everybody. So we're going to walk through about how DUIs are charged, walk through what a typical stop sequence looks like. I'm going to blow through the investigation because that's more for it's like a more sophisticated crowd. Discuss how they're prosecuted, which I think is very interesting, and then, what advice do we give? What advice do I give? I don't take the calls anymore, I'm not going to lie. I've been doing this for 20 years, so I have people that do that. But we have attorneys that answer 24/7, and so what advice are they generally giving to people who are making those calls at 2 a.m. and, pulled over right outside of Old Town? So, and then you guys can have that for free without having to hear it in the middle of the night. So that's what we'll do. All right, raise your hand, ask questions, just start blurting it out and actually raise your hand. Okay, so really interesting points. The Arizona revised statutes are basically all of the laws in the state of Arizona. We don't really operate under common law anymore. They got revoked. So what's interesting is all of the criminal laws are in Title 13. Title 28 is the motor vehicle provisions. DUIs are in there. What that means from a functional standpoint is very little, but it really means that when we have this case right now, which we're actually trying to get legislation passed on, justification is not allowed. So if I pull a gun and I put it to Donna's head, and we've been drinking for hours, and then she's toasted, and I say, drive me, she cannot raise the justification defense that she drove. It's a strict liability charge. That's actually a big deal. We have a bunch of people who are fleeing dangerous situations, who are getting pulled over for DUI, driving erratically, and there's no question about that. But they're not allowed to technically raise those defenses, and unfortunately what that means is we get divergent results because it becomes prosecutorial discretion. And so what this ultimately boils down is that this is kind of terrible law in Arizona, and we really should have justifications built into the law so that we can formally raise it to juries. What we have to do now is this kind of pretend that we're not doing jury nullification when we're actually in fact doing jury nullification. But almost all of these cases get tried, and I'd say about 90-95% of them have successful results because people are kind of generally sympathetic to someone who's fleeing, let's say, a domestic violence situation. I felt that domestic violator, someone who's beating up their spouse, come on scene and try to fight and further a physical fight with his wife while she was being investigated for DUI, where the cops had to intercede, and they still prosecuted that case, and Scottsdale wouldn't dump that case. We had to go to trial. The jury stayed behind to yell at the prosecutor for bringing it, but that was a pretty shitty case, and we want to make sure. That was not a good case, but we had to go to a jury trial on it because we didn't have any legal defenses in that case, and that was kind of what we were there. Okay, so how many different DUIs are there? People ask this question all the time, and the answer is there are lots. And I'll get into them. I'm going to blow through them because this is kind of the least interesting part of the discussion, but I'm going to walk through something that I think is interesting. So this is the first one here. 28-1381A1 is the impaired to the slightest degree statute. When we talk about Arizona being a zero tolerance state, this is what they're talking about. So everyone kind of assumes the ubiquitous 0.08 is the rule. That is not the rule. When DUIs are charged, there's always a minimum of 2 DUIs charged. You can have as many as 8 or 9 charged at the same time, depending on the facts of the case. But the 2 DUIs are always this one, this bottom basement, 281381, and all it requires is that the officer have jurisdiction, that there's driving, or what we call actual physical control. I'll just go through that. That the person is under the influence. Yeah.
It says drugs, alcohol, vapor for
Yeah.
combo. So like kids vaping in their car, like
Not that
scaring their
parents. The vapor being like huffing.
Oh. I forget.
Any impairing substance. Whippets. Yeah, whippet. We have dust off too. We had a lady.
Dust off.
Yeah, they
Like
she
ponic
go
spray?
right into a firehouse. With like 11 or 15 like dust off cans sitting around. That was not a good case. Alright, so that's what we're talking about with Arizona being zero tolerance. There is no number, so any impairment at all. So you consume any amount of any impairing substance whatsoever and operate a motor vehicle, and in the state of Arizona, they can and will prosecute you under this charge. This is the next one, is the one that everyone is keenly aware of, which is the .08 number. It's the same general elements. It just requires that the state prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the defendant had a .08, not at the time of driving, anytime within 2 hours of driving. I'll tell you why they did that. There was a terrible defense that people used to raise, which is that I didn't drink all night at the bar, and then right at the end, I would drink 5 shots, and then I got in the car. So when you pulled me over, that alcohol hadn't absorbed into my blood, and as a result, when I was driving, I was way under the .08, and I wasn't impaired. But then by the time I got back to the station, I was. So what they did was they put this extra provision in that required that blood or breath or some chemical test be garnered within that 2 hour window, and whatever it is at that 2 hour window is kind of deemed to be what it is at the time of driving. It actually just makes the life of the prosecutor more difficult. They messed this up so much, trying to avoid. No one would do that. I mean, that defense never worked. No one thought that you were sitting there teetotaling all night and decided at the end, right before close, to have 5 or 8, 10 shots. So it was a terrible offense that nobody actually raised, but this was an intent to try that, and it actually just mucked up the system. This is the extreme DUI. This is where punishments start getting big. So this is where it is additionally illegal to drive. Same elements apply, but it's additionally illegal to drive with a VAC above a .15. What I tell people is .08 is a lot less than you think it is. So when .08 is a low number. The impairment level of .08 is kind of, the way I describe it is you're at the where you're aware that you've consumed alcohol. Like you have that general sense, is probably where most people are at .08. It's like I'm aware that alcohol is in my system, I feel alcohol in my system, you're probably at .08. .15 is when you start going to, like if you're at I don't know if you can tell, I like to eat chicken wings and watch sports and bars and drink beer. .15 is where you start flipping tables kind of as you're walking to and from the bathroom that you're going to more frequently. That's what the .15 is. We have another one in Arizona, the super extreme DUI, which was codified in 2012, and that is above a 2.0. I don't know if you're pukers, but you know, there's a good chance if you haven't puked already, you're going to puke. That's kind of where the 2.0 number is. We have people who are .4s, .5s. I mean, we have incredible numbers. And usually it's cocaine that's keeping their heart beating at that level. But it is what it is. Okay.
What's ABC?
ABC is so driving, it requires driving. We're going to get to it in just a second, but driving or actual physical control. We have these cases all the time. So there is an inordinate amount of people who, and especially like in an apartment complex, you're having a domestic and you and your spouse or significant other are having a fight and you want to extricate yourself. Everybody's been drinking, and you extricate yourself, you go into the, you know you're not going to drive. So you go in your car, you turn the ignition on, and you go to sleep. In the state of Arizona, the officers interpret that as actual physical control. So it's ultimately an imminency test. Can you imminently be in control of a motor vehicle? Like, and driving is 4 wheels moving. This is kind of this additional element that allows them to prosecute those cases. They prosecute those cases regularly. We do about 20% of our trials are innocent trials because they over-prosecute, in my humble opinion. I don't think these cases or those situations really are DUIs. They over-prosecute those mainly to make sure that their statistics are let's just call this a baby DUI. It's actually technically in Title IV. This is someone under the age of 21. It's zero tolerance. You can't have any spiritus alcohol in your system, and so you get tagged with baby DUI. Good news is that there's no mandatory jail time. Bad news is they yank your license for a long period of time. And so there's kind of, you have to sway some things as we were kind of figuring out what we're going to do. DUI drugs used to be about 1% of our cases, now it's about 20%, and it's not marijuana. It's pills. So people are over medicated, and they were doing a daytime DUI task force where they were just pulling over people gray hair on Hayden Road and asking them what medication they were taking.
Oh my
And we had like a 10-week period of time at one point where our median intake was 72 years old. And I ended up going and talking to the city council and just being like, you gotta change. This is terrible. And so that was going on. So most of the stuff. Now there are a number of people who are clearly over medicated who should not be operating motor vehicles, and so there are a lot of those types of prosecutions. But the vast majority is not marijuana. It is actually medications that are either prescribed or not being taken as prescribed. I won't get into the defenses. Anyone a pill popper here?
I have an interesting question though. So,
Just start with, I have a friend.
this can be directed at me too, because so Polynesians drink kava. Have you guys addressed that? Because so I'm a retired fireman. One time we went on a call and we went on a small guy that they suspected him for DUI. They pulled him out, and then he started taking off. There was like 5 officers on his back. He was a big man, and they got him down and they tested him, and he was negative for alcohol. And like, we don't know what's going on. Like no drugs, no nothing. He'd been drinking coffee, which is common.
So the way it works, there's a bunch of different ways that this works from a practical standpoint, which is when they draw blood, the first thing they always do is check for alcohol because it's just very easy. It's an easier procedure to test for. It's a volatile, so the man hours to test it are significantly less. So they'll test it for alcohol. If it's below 0.08 or there's a major suspicion of drug impairment, they'll run what's called an ELISA screen, which is like the big categories of drugs to determine what's going on. And if someone's positive in that, they'll then do what's called a confirmation test using GC mass spec, which is a different, more labor-intensive testing process. Are there people who get negative results that are probably impaired based off of substances they take that aren't in like groupings? Yes. I think from a public policy standpoint, everyone just kind of has to turn their head away a little bit and be like, we can't test for everything, and the ELISA screens aren't there. So there are a couple of substances that are just not tested for, so I think there's some people who kind of probably should be prosecuted that aren't because of that.
So he would be a DUI.
It would be hard to prove it. Like, remember, so it's not what I always tell people is this, what actually happened that night is not I don't care, that's an irrelevant fact. My job is to hold the state accountable for proving every element of every charge beyond all reasonable doubt. And so when you look at it through that kind of, it's just a slight shift of the frame, when you look at it from that perspective, it fundamentally changes the dynamic of what's going on in the courtroom, and just making sure that the government is doing their job, and if they can prove it, they can prove it. If they can't prove it, then they can't prove it. And in situations like that, I don't know how you would prove that if you can't test for it.
And the reason I asked too, because there's now like 3 kava bars in the valley.
I don't even know
That
what
people
Kava
go
is.
on. It's a root that's compounded and then it's filtered, but it actually can make you euphoric if you drink enough. And then
It's like nicotine euphoria or a different kind of euphoria?
you get kind of numb and you know it gives you a buzz a little bit, a different kind, right? But not like you're dizzy or can't control yourself or anything. It depends how much you drink. But yeah, there's a couple bars now that serve it. There's one in Flag too, and then they're selling them in these little bottles at the smoke shops and stuff. People smash those like, to try and calm their anxiety.
Which smoke shop?
shop?
So the way that remember this impairment charge. So the impairment charge is that bottom basement. If you take anything at all, it doesn't matter what it is, and that substance impairs you to the slightest degree, they can prosecute you under that 281381A. Right. It could be anything. Yeah. Anything at all. Then there's DUI drugs. The way that they get you on DUI drugs is we have a provision in the statute that basically is a list. So it's 133401. It's just a long list of every substance, legal or illegal, that you can put in there. And as a result, like you just have that long list, and that's what it is. Based off of the fact that they're selling it in smoke shops, I was probably not on that list. Subsequent, legislative sessions, every year they add to the list. So they're trying to put Delta 8 on. So they're doing all sorts of things that are just adding to that list every time.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I, yeah.
So if you don't test for your, like if you don't test for the level that will say that you're drunk or something, but your behavior is so sporadic. Will they hold you to
Reckless driving.
Well, no, they'll prosecute a DUI. So in Mesa, the numbers are relevant. They've gone to jury trials in .04s because the person hit like a bus full of nuns in an accident. And then came out and acted like someone who hit a bus full of nuns. So it was like, they just like, the numbers are relevant. They dropped the A2 charge, the BAC above .08. They're like, this person was impaired, actually convicted in Mesa. Whether or not, it was actually a good attorney that was representing him, so it wasn't me. I wouldn't have lost that case, but it was still a good attorney and it was still problematic. So depending on where you're at, it'll change. Sometimes they have policies because it's the government. They just have policies like if this then that. But it's prosecutorial discretion. There's a lot of latitude given to prosecute cases. So the stop and did I answer the question?
Yeah. Well, you know, I kind of follow up on
Sure.
that. So I've mentioned to nieces that we don't drink, that they smoke pot all the time. But they think they're fine for driving because they're not drunk.
No.
So the explanation then is, if you get pulled over and you don't pass this test, they're going to go draw your blood and you're just going to do DUI.
Yeah, so when they were running 207, when they were running 2012, I consulted with them and they completely disregarded my language that I had written for them. Remember, I do lobbying work, so I write legislation. And they completely biffed it because of a major problem. When they were running 207, which was the decriminalization of marijuana, again, they brought me in to consult. I spent a ton of time writing how the language should be done, and they completely disregarded it again. Causes a ton of problems right now. What's going on? We're litigating it. My office is actually went on a lot of that litigation. But the answer is they can run you if they're impaired, if they're stoned and impaired. They'll run them on the A1 charge, even if they can't convict them of the DUI drugs now. But there are still agencies that are prosecuting for the A3s because of how it's playing out.
Because doesn't marijuana also stay in your blood for a long time?
Yeah, there's good cases. So THC, active THC stays in your system for between 2 and 6 hours. It'll break down into hydroxy THC, which will stay for another 2 to 6 hours. And then it'll turn into carboxy THC, which will stay in your system for up to 45 days. Carboxy, you can't be prosecuted. It is an inactive metabolite. But hydroxy, it's like the spider, not that anybody here has ever done it, but the spider web feel, like the grogginess is caused by the hydroxy, which is not active, which is the first generation metabolite for active THC, Delta 9.
And that's considered that's a lot.
It's irrelevant because basically what happens is they do these what are called DREs, which are made up comp tests, and I don't mean to be disparaging, but they're really garbage. It's just pseudoscience. It's like phrenology, and then they always come to the conclusion that you're high because the first question they ask is what drugs are you on, and everyone says I just smoked a little marijuana, and then of course they find impairment for marijuana, and that happens all the time. Okay, so the stop, everyone thinks, hey, the typical stop is someone driving down Scottsdale Road or Hayden Road, banging curbs, and that's why everyone gets stopped. That is way, way rare. Maybe 5-10% of the cases we have kind of the egregious, atypical kind of DUI driving pattern. The absolute number one reason why people are pulled over is for not turning into the lane that you're supposed to. So when you make a right-hand turn, you have to turn into the lane closest to the curb. You make a left-hand turn, you have to turn into the lane closest to the median. They stop. I mean, now, when you drive home, watch. Nobody pulling out does that. But after 10 p.m., everybody's getting stopped. And so that happens absolutely all the time, and that's where they're initiating the stop. The officers then approach, and then they begin their investigation. So that's the number one thing. Number two thing that we see a ton of, it went in and out of fashion, it's coming back. Check your license plate light. They've been tagging people, so like if your license plate light goes out, that little LED light above it, for years that was like the number two reason, then it kind of went away, and now it's coming back again, it's coming back into fad. So turn off, like tonight when you park, go outside, set an alarm for like 10 p.m. or 8 p.m., whatever it is, go outside, open the garage door, park in the garage, whatever you are, and then turn it over, and then go around and look and see if that light is still in effect, or if it's super dim. It costs like $3 to get a new light, but it will definitely cheaper than my services. So that's that. Yeah.
Do they legally have to give you a reason why they pulled you over? The reason why I ask, I drive for a living. I got pulled over twice for DUIs. I had customers in my car. I do not drink alcohol at all. And I explained that to the officer very politely.
Sure.
And I asked them, the reason why he pulled me over. Neither one said, and both of them had to get out and do the full blown DUI test, and I blew 0.0000000. I mean,
they have to have what's called reasonable or ticketable suspicion to initiate a stop. They should, based off of all police book policies, let you know what the reason for the stop is, but they don't often do.
yeah, I was at a traffic light, and the light turned green. I just started to leave, and they lit me up, and I did absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But I just was amazed that they just could pull you over for.
So in Arizona, the Supreme Court has said on numerous occasions that pretext stops, so stops even though they had no intention of writing the ticket for whatever the stop is completely legal, as long as the officer can say that what they were pulling you over for was reasonable or ticketable, had reasonable or ticketable suspicion to do so. And I have a friend of mine who's a judge, and he kind of laughingly says, if an officer is behind you for more than 30 seconds and can't find a reason to pull you over, just turn their gun and badge you. There's nobody who can't have a reason to have you pulled over. So they can pull over anybody for any reason, do whatever they want. They should, as a policy, and also their own internal policies let you know, but they don't. Am I doing time? I have no idea when this started. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Yeah, about 15. Okay, so when they approach, what they're going to do is they're going to ask a bunch of questions all at the same time. They call this divided attention, and if you actually think about it, from a conceptual standpoint, it makes sense. So what they'll do is they'll walk over, they'll say, hey, can you get me your license, your registration, your proof of insurance, and hey, where are you coming from? What were you doing today? And then what they want to see is, can you perform the task that they gave you, and then also simultaneously answer questions that you're answering. And that's generally what they will do at the same time. These things are great. Keep these in your car. Just keep your registration, your insurance. You're not rifling through paperwork trying to think and do different things, because now you're making it more difficult on yourself. Your registration and proof of insurance is right in here. You grab it, they do this. It's funny now how many reports I see, which is they will describe this with absolute detail. Pulled over, it says Rosenstein largely on there. It's funny to read the police reports, but they know what's going on, and that's what's happening. So that's the first thing that happens on approach, is they begin with the divided attention tasks. The problem is, from a practical standpoint, listen, I even get it. Like, I have a little bit of a left foot. I've got so I get pulled over, and I deal with cops all day long, constantly. And I still get that kind of tightness in the chest, and and they I think those are constantly being misinterpreted for failure. They'll say that your fingers, your dexterity while you were flipping through your paperwork was problematic. And it's clearly nerve-induced, but anything that can be categorized or written in such a way to tell a story that fits their narrative is actually being done. And so what you want to do is really limit what you're doing or providing for them kind of down the road. And this is whether you're sober in your situation or not. Because we have, if you actually look, I'm going off a little bit, but when we do blood reviews, this is kind of the thing that makes us special, is that we do comprehensive blood reviews, and Scottsdale Crime Lab is the gift that keeps on giving. It's already put my kids through college, you know what I mean? But when we look at the analog and the data that comes from it, the thing that we see, the thing that jumps out to me is between 25 and 33% of we see the entire run, of all of the defendants who were taken to the station and had their blood drawn, have 0 BACs or almost nothing, 0.01, 0.02. And that's in every run, time and time again. They do 1 to 2 runs a day. And so it's you look at that number and you go, how many people were being taken down there completely sober because of what's going on? And the amount of calls that we get, everything lines up, and that's happening very, very frequently. So the goal in this particular case is to arm you guys, even if you're not going to be tied with DUI, at least arm you with information to kind of limit or prevent that from occurring, because no one wants to have a cop. By the way, they don't take you to the hospital, the cop draws your blood. And if it's a cop, that's not fun. Okay. Next one? Yeah. Okay, so here's the rules. And you might be the exception to the rule. I'll tell you this, and the numbers and data that support this are, if you're asked out of the car, you're getting arrested. And that's even with 000, and that's because what they do is they just assume whatever they saw that pulls you out of the car, they're going to think it's impairment. And they're going to go, okay, they have you blow into the little DVT, it blows 000. They go, well, I saw impairment, so it must be drugs. So that's what generally happens. So what I always tell people is, do everything humanly possible to convince the officer not to ask you out of the car. But once you're asked out of the car, be be prepared to have handcuffs put on you, take you to the police station, and have your blood drawn, oftentimes by the officer who arrested you, which I do not agree with.
That's not against the amendment.
No, it's problematic. In fact,
Like 456, like didn't it prevent that from happening?
no. Because either through consent, if you informed consent documents, you either consent or they'll get a warrant. In Arizona, they have judges sitting 24/7 because rubber stamping the warrant request. And then with the warrant request come different problems, like 1 year suspension. I dropped a bill that actually went into effect in September. Actually, no, this was in January. It went into effect on January 1st. That changed the punishment category for whether or not you refuse. So maybe we get into that a little bit, but we're recording, so I have to be careful. All right, the field sobriety test. Let me be unequivocally clear. These are not peer-reviewed. I mean, these tests are not good for diagnosing what they think it is. Like, you have to be a medical professional. One of the tests is the modified Romberg test. It was designed in the early 1900s to diagnose early-stage syphilis. So, like, the things that they're doing is all akin to what's called phrenology. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained was giving, like, a lesson in phrenology, and it was like people's skulls would have indications, like the shape of their skull would indicate their personality type. Turns out that it's complete bullshit. They testified in court to it for like 100 years. Hair follicle, I don't know if you saw this, the FBI completely pulled hair follicle testing because they admitted that they were attributing canine hair and saying that was definitively the defendant's hair. And then, so there's a myriad of like these pseudosciences that are used in the criminal justice system that are absolutely atrocious. Everything related to the DUI defense is in that category. So the three standardized tests they call it that they use are the one-leg stand, the walk and turn test, and what's called the HGN test, the horizontal gaze and status test. Now, quickly, my dad was an optometrist in rural California growing up. I used to grind lenses in the back of his office. I happened to be very familiar, and he went on to do ophthalmic pharmaceutical manufacturing. So, like, just because of a weird coincidence, I happen to know a lot about eyes and how the eyes work in the head. And I can tell you with absolute sincerity, some of the tests that they think is the most reliable scientific test is the eye test, the one that they go back and forth. It is completely ridiculous. It is complete junk science. It has no reliability to whether or not someone has consumed anything at all. It is absolute and unequivocal junk science. So my recommendation is this. I'm not allowed to definitively tell anybody that they should not do these tests because technically they're not protected under the Fifth Amendment because they're non-testimonial and you're in a custodial thing. You have to, by law, do them. I can tell you it is unwise to ever participate in any of these tests. You cannot, by definition, have to. So these tests, if you fail them, you fail. If you don't score a high enough score to justify a fail, then they are, by definition, inconclusive. So you can only fail these tests. And then the eye test itself is crazy. It is, everyone has, it's called, they call it horizontal gaze nystagmus. It's made up by cops in the 1970s. It is not true. It's called gaze evoked nystagmus. There's 400 years of scientific literature on it. Everybody at 10 p.m. has gaze evoked nystagmus, like 85% of the population. So there's a correlation that they claim is there that's because they don't understand how statistical analyses work. Yeah.
Can you refuse to do any of those tests?
I cannot tell you to refuse, but I can tell you it is unwise to participate. And the best way that you do it, this is the practical answer, ready? You just say, I would love to do whatever you instruct. Because there's no reason to be a jerk. And I always say, like, be polite. Like, being polite will get you a million miles. These cops are doing their job. They're not bad guys. There's a couple other tools, but most of them are pretty good. And you just go, listen, as soon as I talk to my attorney and my attorney tells me that I should do it, I'd be happy to. They go, you don't have a right to talk to your attorney then. You go, well, as soon as I talk to him and he tells me what to do or not do, or she, then I will participate. But until then, I'm not. And they'll say, you do not have a legal right to speak to your attorney. You are legally obligated to do these tests. Do them. And you go, as soon as I speak to my attorney, if my attorney tells me to do them, I would be happy to do them for you. And then handcuffs will be put on you and you'll be transported to the station. And if they don't afford you the opportunity to call your attorney in very short order, you will get all charges dismissed. That happens very rarely.
Stick to your guns.
Yeah.
So as you said though, if they get you out of the car,
You're getting arrested
you're going
anyway.
anyways.
That's fine. So
yeah.
obviously there's exceptions, and I'll say it, there clearly are, but the overwhelming majority of people, who are asked out of their vehicles are ultimately taken down regardless of what you do or do not do. So politely just sticking by your guns in this situation is absolutely the best advice.
So which test does that apply to again?
All
Which,
Well,
any,
yes, the
anything?
roadside tests.
Any roadside test?
Anything done roadside, which is going to be 2 balancing tests, like stand on one leg, walk in the straight line, and then the eye test. And they'll just start doing things. And listen, I get why they're doing it. If I was a cop, I'd probably do what they do too. So what they'll do is they have their PB key in the car, they just walk over, they don't ask, they just jam like a straw in your mouth. Right? And you just have to be like, I will do this as soon as my attorney tells me. And then they'll just start looking like they don't ask you. Like it's not like a
Consent.
yeah, it's
It's
a lot.
just
It's very. Imagine like the most aggressive guy you've ever dated. You know, it's like slapping their hands around and it's just like that's what they do. There's a reason why they do it, but like that's what they do, and you have to be like, stop. Like, yeah.
What about when people get their phones out and they're trying to record because they feel like, oh, I changed lanes wrong or something, there are cops behind me, and then people get their phones out because they know this cop's going to try to say I'm doing something. Does that piss the cop off? Like I feel like this cop's going to try to get me on something. I've not been drinking, but I'm going to turn my phone on right now.
Depends on how you do it.
Recording, and I'm saying, listen, I know I shouldn't have
Please
switched
have
lanes.
cameras.
Yes, the problem is they have a body camera, but they have the ability, and I'm running a bill this session to prevent this. It's actually very expensive to the state, and they still have to go through. We've gotten killed in having the budget for it, but they can turn it off and on their body camera. And so what we want to do is prevent that from occurring. And so oftentimes the thing that we're looking for most is it doesn't happen to have been recorded. So I found that it's a lot less frowned upon than it was even 5 years ago. They don't scream and yell at it as much as they do with the recordings. And then the other thing is it's like it depends on the cop and it depends on how you do it. If you're a jerk about it, I think you probably get kind of not the best reception. If you happen to be wearing like a shirt that you just hold it, you just are recording them like they're recording you. I don't think that will.
Yeah, I assume you just don't want to be obvious.
Yeah.
Right. Just leave it on.
I think sometimes
Turn it on.
Yeah. It depends. It's so fact specific. It kind of depends. Yeah.
So I feel like because I watch the show Cops, I'm a pro. I'm an insurance agent. So no, but on the other, one thing I am curious about, because we've all seen it, right? And the cop walks up and then people just start talking too much. And at what point, like politely, obviously we always want to be polite to police officers. However, you also being the attorney too, you're like, I wish you just wouldn't have said that.
I say it a little bit more crassly, but there are young children in the room, which is shut. You can imagine what up.
But at what point can I feel like, maybe I've had too many cocktails, I need to stop what I'm saying to,
So here's the thing. I say this
Obviously,
regularly.
no, I don't prescribe.
Say and do whatever you have to do to not be asked out of the car.
I understand.
Once you're asked out of the car, it ends. Like, it's no more words, no more statements.
So, I'm really boring. I don't drink, I don't smoke pot, I don't take any narcotics. Like, I'll take a Tylenol once every 2 months or something. So, what you're entering is I could still be arrested.
Yes.
And then what would happen if I was arrested after they did the
Draw your blood. Depends on which jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions will wait for blood results to come back and charge you. Like Gilbert's does that. Scottsdale will just cite you with a DUI.
They charge you for the blood draw?
Charges and criminally charge. No, but they do. Gilbert does get, they ask for reimbursement. They ask for restitution for the cost of the kit and the testing on every case. Also, Arizona's the only state where you pay for your jail time. But yeah, so what happens is they'll charge you, and then if ultimately they find that you had no alcohol or no drugs, then a prosecutor will make a decision and they'll likely dismiss charges. The problem is now your record shows that you've been arrested for DUI. And what's even crazier is they could submit what's called the admin per se form, which notifies MVD that you were arrested, and there are consequences that stem from simply being arrested for DUI. And in other states, then it's on your record as a admin per se. It's problematic. There's ways.
So, what if my kids were in the car with me when that happened?
Then it's
Is that
felonies.
Yeah. But would the record be dropped eventually? Or would
Well, you'd be charged with class 6 felonies.
You need to hire a lawyer.
That sucks.
That actually did happen to me, and I got all the charges dropped, and it's on my driving record, or one of the, it's not on my criminal record, it's on my driving record, and it attests points to my driving record.
So I think
I didn't change it from the motor vehicle
We can get that explained.
Not being fair at all, not having anything in my system, but being like, it distracting me when my turn is at a long lane, and all of a sudden I'm facing all these criminals that are driving me.
Yes. With kids under the age of 15.
My mom gets out tickets all the time with little kids in their back.
You say you're supposed to say, you can test me, but I can talk to my lawyer first.
Yes.
I'll do whatever. Listen. I'm innocent. I want to participate and prove my innocence to you, but it's wise. Like I'm just gonna call my attorney. You can name drop.
But if it's 11 p.m., most likely, like that number that's on your thing will be
24-hour sets that'll pass through to an on-call attorney. So like on the big weekends, we have 3 attorneys that are on call.
What will the attorney advise you?
It depends because there's different. It's a very nuanced question, so there's multiple variables that determine what we're going to say. I know this is crazy, but we're going to make sure we get somewhere private and not in front of the officer because you'll be surprised. Like people just start talking, they'll call us roadside, and they'll be like, "I had like 11 margaritas." Like, what's your name?
And they're like, shut up.
And I'm like, "Hey, where's the cop?" And they're like, "He's like standing shoulder to shoulder." I'm like, "Can you not talk while it's night? Can we just have a stop?" Yeah, so that happens regularly, but it's also like jurisdictionally, like if it's DPS on the west side or the east side, if it's Scottsdale, it's going to be different than if it's Gilbert, different than if it's Tempe, different than if it's, it varies so specifically.
I was talking to a police officer. I was working at an event. He was telling me all this stuff. And he goes, "Oh, on the big, like Memorial Day, the big weekends." He said they get so many DUIs, which is honestly shocking with Uber and stuff, whatever. And he was like, a lot of times they get dismissed if they're really not all of them. But do you find that to be true? Because he's like, we just don't have the capacity to like process.
Oh no, all of those are prosecuted. The ones that are dismissed are because they do these like. They call them saturation controls.
Okay.
So what they'll do is they'll pick a city. So they'll pick a Tempe, and then they'll send half the Mesa DUI squad, half the Scottsdale DUI squad, half the Gilbert DUI squad, all into this geographic area, and they'll just arrest everyone. And so everyone's got their blood. Then they bring them back, and they have all of these blood vans that are sitting like in a Walmart or a QT parking lot, and they just start drawing people's blood like constantly. And then what'll happen is they don't have like a lot of people who are completely sober. Or like driving, we had so many Uber drivers who were like, I was literally sober driving other people, and they just stopped that person.
We've had an Uber driver who was wasted.
Well, what's the point of that?
I'm not going to defend saturation patrols. It's because Arizona is illegal to have roadblocks. So the only places that get some roadblocks are coming back from the river, and that's on the res. So we don't have roadblocks, so as opposed to roadblocks, they do these saturation patrols to try to. The public policy perspective is we know when people have a tendency to drink and drive, we're going to saturate this particular neighborhood, we're going to catch as many people as we can and hopefully dissuade people from doing so. You don't know where that's going to be. The funny thing is, we deal with the cops so regularly, and there's like Twitter accounts that you can follow that tell you like where they are, and like if you're following a Twitter account to try to avoid the geography of where saturation control is, like I think you got some other issues that you're probably working on. Yeah.
Can you refuse to get out of the car?
No. I mean, you can, but then they will physically remove you from the vehicle. And then they will escort you to the ground, as they call it. They will pull you through the window and escort you to the ground.
And you will spend the night in jail?
No, not necessarily. A lot of them are site release. So they don't want you to get credit for because Arizona is the only state in the union that has mandatory jail time on first offenses. And so they don't want you to get credit for the jail time. So what they'll do is they'll release you early, or they'll release you inside of 4 hours, and you don't get that credit. And so it's site release generally. All right, ask for an attorney. Ask for an attorney. Ask for an attorney. Again, I forgot what. Yeah, about 5 minutes. Okay. Again, the HGN. I kind of just started revamping, so we can go ahead. I've brought people up. I've given speeches like this before. I'm certified to administer the tests, and so I've given people tests nobody ever passes. It's like I can fail everybody. Like stand, same thing. No one ever passes. The PBT is not admissible in court, so the little handheld breath tester doesn't satisfy Daubert standard, so scientifically unreliable. But that also swings both ways. So we have a lot of people who blow a 0.04, and because of the Scottsdale Crime Lab, all of a sudden they come back with a 0.22 blood, and it's like, hey, there's a major disparity here. Let's look at it. We can't introduce that to the jury. There are ways to get it in, so we can do this. Again, if the question is ultimately, if you ask out of the car, what do you do? I think I've probably gone through almost everything. That's it. Is there any questions? Any other questions that I can answer? Then I should find what's wrong over that. Yeah. So in Arizona, okay. Last thing. The chemical tests that are admissible is from one machine. It's called the CMI Produced. It's a Kentucky company called CMI. They make a machine called the Intoxilizer 8000. They just released the 9000. The only reason why we use the 8000 in the state of Arizona, or the CMI Produced Intoxilizer 8000, is the woman at the time, this VHS has been subsequently absorbed by PBS. At the time, the woman who was in charge of determining which breath test machines we use in the state happened to be married to the VP of sales for the company that sold it. This machine is so unreliable that there are many states in the union that will not allow it to be used. So like Tennessee had like this massive campaign to determine what the best breath testing machine is, and they called this machine unreliable, inaccurate. I forgot there was another great adjective for it. So Texas, I mean, so no one, almost nobody else. They had $1 million a day judgment coming out of Florida because of their failure to disclose. Like they were so bad that people started catching on. So it was costing them $1 million a day. So they had like, tried to arrest the guy on the golf course. It was crazy. So the machine is garbage. So whatever everyone thinks it's like guilt by machine, the CMI produced the Contox 8000 and the 9000 to slightly lesser degree are garbage machines, and so we fight those regularly. The blood tests, it depends on which lab they're using. It got so bad in Arizona that they started shipping the blood to a lab in Pennsylvania. They just stopped doing that because they forgot about the constitutional right to confront your accusers. And so we were just going to trial in the cases, and they were like not able to send. It was wacky. But the Scottsdale Crime Lab, I've said before, is the gift that keeps on giving. It's already put my kids through college. It is an inaccurate and terrible crime lab. The Mesa Crime Lab is marginally better, but not great. The problem is this: you would never, if you had a medical decision to make based off of the quality controls and the methodology that these labs are utilizing, you would never make your decision based off of the results of this machine, of the way that they do this testing. And so when you really think about it, like if proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you're going to take someone's freedom and you're going to cast them as a criminal, the goal, and you're going to like permanently mar their record based off of the results that pop out of a machine. That machine better be pretty good, or the methodology that's utilized better be pretty good. And unfortunately, it's not. And when you're able to make that comparison and say, here's if the medical profession uses significantly better, or can afford to use significantly better testing protocols and criteria, like how can you be beyond a reasonable doubt? It's our job to explain those distinctions to jurors, and oftentimes, like it's challenging those chemical tests is where we do our best work. That's it. I mean, the rest of it is just like I got one. Yeah.
So in the event of like Raina's situation over here, all the charges get dropped, but there's still that, hey, she got pulled over for a DUI. With you as our lawyer, would you be able to get that expunged from the record?
So one of my passion projects was to get expungement in the state of Arizona. It just went into effect in January. It took us 9 years to get past the legislature and signed by the previous governor. It's good. It's a good start. It's not great, but we're working on it. When it comes to DUIs, we've been able to expunge and work with the executive hearing office and the MPD judges. When charges are dropped, we can get the records, the driving record cleaned up, so it doesn't cost. Because if you have an admin percentage record on your driving record, it's like you can't get insurance. It becomes a real pain because like unfortunate to have it. And you didn't do anything wrong. But there's a methodology. So what we do in our office is often. Because here's the problem, too, from a real practical standpoint, is a lot of people come into our office and tell us that they're absolutely innocent and that there's no reason or nothing's going to come up positive, their BAC is going to be 0, and for a myriad of reasons. So we have to represent them now. We get retained. We start repping them with the MPD, which is the first thing that has to be done right away. We start navigating that kind of bureaucracy and doing a ton of loss mitigation work. And then we're waiting to see what the blood results ultimately come back at. And then, surprise, surprise, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I did all that coke.
What do you know?
So, I mean, it just changes the dynamic of like what we're doing, right? And so that happens quite a bit. So the way we do it is we kind of have structured payments where it's like, well, if your BAC is like nothing or close to nothing, we'll represent you through this MPD process in order to make sure, and then there's no additional charges. But if it comes back, you even if what you're saying is true and it's a lab error, we still have to fight it in court. So then we do it that way. So that's generally how we structure it. So we try to get ready early on and help people navigate those processes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Say you're casually going out with a couple couples and you're at dinner. I mean, is it okay to have a couple of drinks, or no? You suggest?
Well, it depends on your side. So there's a Widmark formula that I kind of do as I'm drinking, you know. But I don't know if you guys can tell. We have a little bit more than the average male, and so I can consume more. It has to do with height, weight, and gender. And so I can generally, and I actually calculate it based off of like I'm a beer drinker. You guys can probably see. So like it depends on what the alcohol by content is, the ABC on the alcohol. So like I know what a standard drink is and how much that raises my alcohol percentage when fully absorbed. So I can kind of monitor it. It's risky. I mean, and by the way, I know what that number is, but I also like that number is almost irrelevant because of the A1. So you know, you go up and you're like, I'm a 0.08, I'm going to wait a few minutes, and I'll be a 0.07 in an hour, right? Conservatively, that would be like the estimate. But you'd still be prosecuted at 0.07, so it's not a really good idea. You got to know. So if it's like, for me, 1 beer, I'm fine. 2 beers, I'm probably fine. After 3, like I went out drinking last night and I did not drink. But then again, if I got pulled over, people would be flying in from vacation to come out. We have a good a holiday party every year where some cops show up. But there are definitely some officers who are not like in the Craig Rosenstein fan club, and so it'd be problematic.
So one more thing is, we lived in Washington State. They didn't really prosecute anything under 0.08. What we would do, my husband and I like to drink wine. We would always have the breathalyzer, and if we were anywhere near that, we would hang out for a little bit longer. So here, being 0.00, no tolerance, what do you think about the breathalyzers that you can get on Amazon just to make sure you're blowing 0.00 on your own? So
they're good guesses at best.
Okay. Yeah.
The problem is even the ones that the cops have, which are better than I have like alcohol sensor FST.
They're fun to play with.
Oh, I have. We do it in our office. We have beer in our fridge. It's a drinking office. It's like Gallows here. We have that. It's not for but with the FST, the alcohol sensor FST, it's like no one relies on that even at the level. Those numbers are. In court, it can only come in on certain circumstances to say the presence of alcohol. Like they won't allow the number to come in under any circumstances.
Gotcha.
So I'm wary of that.
All right, any other questions, guys?
I have one really quick.
Shoot.
So if I was out to dinner, I'm gonna blame my husband. Let's say my husband has a couple drinks and he's like, "Oh, I know I can drive home. I'm fine." So if we get pulled over and he's like, "But we waited like an hour after our last drink, his last drink, okay?" So he knows he's fine. We get pulled over. Isn't it better for him to get the blood test than the breathalyzer? Because by that time
So the way alcohol absorbs in the
I
system.
thought you told me once.
Yeah.
Wait 2 hours.
Here's
blood.
Okay. The reality is, the practical reality is that they draw blood between 55 minutes and an hour and 5 minutes from a stop. They do that because they know that they probably stop you 5 minutes after you started driving. Like that's just what they operate under. The way that alcohol is absorbed in the system is almost none of it is absorbed in the stomach. It's almost absorbed. It's 85% of it is absorbed in the small intestine. And so it's called the absorption rate. And so it generally takes about an hour from your last drink for you to hit your maximum peak VAC. So when they're doing this, they know that. And so they just operate generally under the assumptions that they're drawing your blood when you're hitting your peak number. And so what we do is one of the questions that the attorneys on call will ask is, don't bullshit me. Don't BS me. How long ago did you have your last drink? Because my advice is going to be predicated upon that. If you had your last drink 5 minutes ago, let's get that tested right now. If you had that last drink an hour, let's have a long conversation. Where are your parents from? You know what I mean? So we're going to mess around and try to stall that out because we know where you're peaking out. And it's like, hey, did you have Thanksgiving meal or did you have no snack? Because the pyloric sphincter at the bottom, you can have alcohol just sit on top of food. It's not absorbing. And then when that food finally digests and that pyloric sphincter releases, now all of a sudden that food with all that alcohol will go into the small intestine, and then that will be where it's absorbing. So if you had Thanksgiving dinner, you could have 3 hours before you get your max VAC because your body has to digest it all. So there's a lot of variables that go into kind of giving good advice. The problem is a lot of times we're talking to people who sound 100% sober and that we're just giving this advice to, a lot of the times we're talking to people who are not in conditions that allow us to get good information, and we're basically just, we're utilizing the variables that help us, which is like, what jurisdiction are you in? You know. Cool. It's fact specific.
Anybody else? Thank you so much.
I have swag.
So this is the part of the meeting where everybody gets to do their 30-second commercial. If you've never been to a meeting before, we basically how it works is you do your name, your business name, a little bit about your business, be brief because you have 30 seconds, and we'll give you a signal if you're taking too long. Yeah, we'll wave one of these blue flyers. Then your name and your business name again. A lot of times people don't catch that the first time. That's what that's actually for. And then a tagline if you have one. And if you don't worry about it. Then you want to start? Come on. Okay. Yeah.